So we're going to do this ever so slightly differently. I was going to talk to you for a little bit of time about our public sector enablement, and I'm going to do that very, very quickly. So it's going to be a soundbite rather than something else. And then I'm going to invite Richard Hanson-Gramble, who has, it wasn't me, so Richard has taken investment, or taken funding, I should say, from the UK public sector. And we're going to talk a little bit about that funding together. There are two things that we are really looking at when we talk about the public sector in the manifesto. And what we're asking for is the UK to do something a little bit different. I think Matt Barker was talking about how he saw the UK as being behind. And what we're suggesting is that we don't try to copy what the rest of the world is doing. So we've seen open source program offices, OSPOs, start off in businesses, and they have a dual function. Their function is to answer questions about open source and enable the business to do open source, and then to be sort of public and world-facing. And that public and world-facing is largely about community engagement. It's in projects that they are focused on. And we've seen those roll out in universities, we've seen them roll out in the public sector. We've seen them across the EU, where the EU set theirs up in 2019, and then I think they have one in every state now, and we know that they're good at coordinating and meeting up, so we bring the experts together. And we've seen the same thing happen with the UN, who have a meeting with many OSPOs from different countries. If you look at our report, you'll see there's a really nice piece on what an OSPO is by Chris DeBona. And Chris is the person who coined the phrase program office when he set up Google's program office many moons ago. And what we're asking for is not to set up an OSPO. And we know that if Labour win tomorrow, they do not want to set up new departments, new offices. What they want to do is see things integrate. And in 4 years of experience of talking to the public sector through OpenUK, what we have seen is that there are many, many champions across the Cabinet Office, across DCIT, across the Treasury in open source. And what we want to do is build a horizontal skill set across them, build champions across those different verticals to engage and to enable better open source practices. And we don't just want to see that in the public sector as something that will cascade out to all of the subsidiary parts of it, which we do want to see. We also want to see a shift in how the UK public sector invests. And we've had a world-leading open source first policy for over a decade. But that decade of policy has not been backed with processes that make that funding work. So when you look at what open source is, it requires you to put the code on GitHub with an open source license. It doesn't require you to have collaborators to take contribution, to build documentation, to ensure that the future of that project will be there. In fact, I did an interview for one public sector department where I interviewed a specific individual whose company had been given money to do open source. And when I said, how are you going to build community? How are you going to deal with the future? He said, oh, I've got a 3-year contract. Now, to me, that's a proprietary model. And what we need to do is shift the outcomes. And the way we shift the outcomes is to start at grassroots level. We change what we call open source, what it means to be open source within that funding process. We build understanding in the people who are doing the assessment of that funding. And then we build a different set of measures for the open source to be done well. And we've been actively engaged talking to the different funding departments about this. And it's something that I truly believe is achievable in the next year or two within the UK public sector. And if we can do that, we don't not only have a need, or not have a need rather, for an OSPO, we don't have a need for a sovereign tech fund. We see in Germany, they set up a sovereign tech fund that initially had 15 million of funding, and I think it then went to 50. If we can instead capture the bulk of the funding that is going into technology and innovation and software from those central organizations, going back to something you would have heard many years ago in Europe, that public money for public code principle, and actually do it in a way that works, we can create something that is to the benefit of everybody, not just the UK. And I think one of the best examples of that in real life is the Inspect AI evaluation platform that's come out of the AI Safety Institute about a month ago. And that platform has been open sourced. It also has 8.5 million of funding and the AI Safety Institute team specifically sent it to me, asking me to pass it to the open source communities. You have to be UK-based to apply, but you can have international partners. And what they want to see is people building around that ecosystem. And the beauty of what they've done is, instead of creating regulation that is really prescriptive, regulation that will create regulatory capture where only a handful of big companies can comply, instead of doing that, they're doing what the tech sector does. When the tech sector has a tech challenge, it meets that with tooling. It enables compliance through tooling. And effectively, it's enabling legal solutions through technology. But what's really important is that it then has this opportunity for others to build businesses around that open source platform. They have a commitment from the 16 top LLMs. They've got it over the 2 safety summits to test on the UK's evaluation platform. They have international agreements with Canada, with the US, and with the Commonwealth to partner on safety evaluation. Now, this is the prime example, the perfect example of how the UK can build something where it will then collaborate globally and build a central ecosystem here in the UK. And I think it's the we and the I that Will was talking about. We can create something that benefits the world, and the I in the UK can then leverage that to build businesses and to build a future economy. So I think we do have a way for open source. The keynote I was going to give you was the OSPO is dead, long live the OSPO. The OSPO kind of is dead. You can quote me on that. I'm not going to be very popular because there's a lot of people who have bet their careers on the OSPO. The OSPO is dead in its current format. The OSPO isn't dead for the future. It's just going to look very, very different. It's not going to be isolated. It's not going to be standalone. It's going to be integrated. And what we would ask the UK to do is to use its late mover advantage and build the first of its kind late mover, integrated, open source, shall we call it a program office or something else? Let's see. I don't think the name really matters. But we will be working as soon as the new Prime Minister and front bench are in place to deliver the report to them and to get the opportunities to discuss with them how we can build this for the UK. The first stage will be research, the second stage will be an MVP, and then the third stage will be enabling it. I would also recommend, he's not here today, but Mike Bracken, the former digital director's thought leadership piece in the report, where he talks about what the public sector needs.